What would you do if you pulled into a gas station at 11 o'clock at night and saw a woman sitting on the curb in the rain, hugging a plastic grocery bag like it was the only thing she owned in the world? Would you look away? Would you tell yourself someone else would handle it? Or would you do what Leonard Payne did, roll down your window and ask if she was okay? Because that one question changed everything. For her, for him, for his daughter, who was asleep in the back seat and didn't know that her father was about to make a decision that would cost him more than he ever imagined and give him back something he didn't even know he'd lost. Leonard Payne was 43 years old and tired in the particular way that single fathers get tired, not just in the body, but somewhere deeper in the part of you that used to believe things would get easier. He ran a small auto repair shop on Clement Street in the outer Richmond district of San Francisco, a place he'd built from nothing after his wife walked out 6 years before, leaving him with a 7-year-old named Camille and a mortgage he could barely breathe around. The shop wasn't glamorous. It smelled like oil and rust and old coffee. But it was his, every socket wrench on that wall, every diagnostic machine, every cracked floor tile. His. He'd earned it with hands that never fully got clean anymore, no matter how long he scrubbed. That Tuesday night in November, he'd driven Camille to her violin recital across town, sat in a folding chair in a middle school gymnasium for 90 minutes, and was taking the long way home because Camille always fell asleep in the car, and he didn't want to wake her by stopping at lights on the main roads. He pulled into the Chevron on Balboa Street because the low fuel light had been on for 20 minutes and he was pushing his luck. That's when he saw her. She was sitting on the curb next to the air pump, her back against the concrete pillar, her hair plastered flat against her face from the rain. She was wearing a blazer, a real blazer, the kind you'd wear to a meeting, but it was soaked through and one of the pockets was torn. The grocery bag in her arms held what looked like a manila folder and a pair of flat shoes. She wasn't begging. She wasn't making eye contact with anyone. She was just sitting there, very still, like she was waiting for something that wasn't coming. Leonard pumped his gas. He watched her from the corner of his eye. 2 other cars came and went. Nobody said a word to her. He went inside, paid, came back out. She was still there. He stood by his driver's side door for a long moment. Camille was asleep in the back, mouth open, violin case across her lap. He had a rule about this kind of thing. Not because he was a hard man, but because he was a careful one. Single father, black man, San Francisco. He'd learned that caution wasn't cruelty. It was survival, but the rain was getting harder. He walked over. "Excuse me, ma'am. You okay?" She looked up slowly, like she was surfacing from underwater. Her eyes were brown and very clear, and what he saw in them wasn't fear or desperation. It was exhaustion, the deep kind. The kind that comes not from one bad night, but from a long string of them. "I've had better evenings," she said. Her voice was quiet and precise, each word placed carefully, like someone who was used to choosing them. "You need a ride somewhere?" She looked at him for a moment, then at the sleeping child in the back seat. "I don't want to be any trouble." "You're sitting in the rain," Leonard said. "That's already trouble. Where are you trying to go?" She hesitated. "I'm not entirely sure anymore." He didn't press. He just opened the passenger door. Her name, she told him once they were moving, was Catherine. Just Catherine, she said, like she was deciding something as she said it. She was wearing no jewelry except for a small mark on her right wrist where a watch had been. A pale rectangle of skin, slightly lighter than the rest, the ghost of something expensive, recently gone. She held the grocery bag on her lap with both hands and looked out the window. He didn't pepper her with questions. He'd learned from Camille that sometimes people talk more when you give them silence. "I can drop you at a shelter," he said carefully. "Or if you need to make a call, you can use my phone." "My phone is gone," she said. Then, after a pause, "So is my purse, my ID, my credit cards, all of it." Leonard glanced at her. "Someone robbed you?" "Not exactly." She turned to look at him then, and something complicated moved across her face. "Someone I trusted arranged things so that by the end of today I would have nothing. And I have to admit, they did a very thorough job." He didn't know what to say to that, so he drove. He ended up taking her home because it was the only sensible thing to do. He had a couch. He had a deadbolt. He had a daughter who, when she woke up in the driveway and was introduced to the quiet woman in the wet blazer, simply said, "Did you eat?" "We have leftover chili," and led her inside like stray house guests were perfectly normal. That was Camille. 13 years old and already more gracious than most adults, Leonard knew. Catherine slept on the couch. In the morning, she was up before either of them, and when Leonard came downstairs at 6:15, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad she'd found in his junk drawer, writing in a small, neat hand. The grocery bag was open beside her, and the manila folder was spread across the table, papers sorted into piles. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I needed to think." Leonard made coffee and didn't mind. Over the next 3 days, he learned things about Catherine piece by piece, the way you learn things about a person you didn't expect to know at all. She was 51, though she didn't look it. She had a background in corporate law and had spent the last 12 years running the operational arm of a pharmaceutical company called Vesper Holdings, which her father had founded in the 90s, and which she had quietly grown into something worth close to $800 million. She was methodical and soft-spoken, and she laughed very rarely, but when she did, it surprised you. Sudden and genuine, like a window opening. What had happened to her was not a robbery. It was something more patient and more deliberate than that. A man named Elliot Crane had joined Vesper Holdings 4 years ago as chief financial officer. He came with credentials, references, a decade of experience at a firm in Boston. He was charming in the careful way of people who've practiced it. Catherine had trusted him, and over the following years, he had systematically, document by document, vote by vote, used that trust to reroute authority away from her and toward a structure he controlled. He'd cultivated relationships with 2 board members. He'd rewritten company bylaws in language so technical that the changes slid past people who should have caught them. He'd moved her from operational power to a figurehead role so gradually that by the time she understood what had happened, the votes were already lined up. The week before Leonard found her at the gas station, she had been removed from her own company in what Crane called a strategic leadership transition. Her shares had been frozen pending a legal review. A review, she explained with a tight, measured calm, that Crane himself had triggered by filing a complaint alleging financial mismanagement on her part. Mismanagement that she had not committed and that he had manufactured with forged documentation. She had walked out of the Vesper Holdings building with what she could carry. Someone had taken her purse in the elevator. She'd been sitting on that curb for 2 hours before Leonard pulled in. "You have evidence?" Leonard asked. They were in his shop after hours, Camille at a friend's house, a single work light on overhead. Catherine had spent the day calling in legal contacts from a borrowed phone, and she'd come to the shop because she said she thought better when she could pace. "I have some," she said. "Not enough. Yet. Who else knows my former assistant, Diane?" She paused. "She has access to certain internal systems Elliot doesn't know about. Files I archived. If she can pull them without triggering a security flag, we have a case, and if she can't..." Catherine was quiet. "Then Elliot wins." Leonard was quiet, too. He turned a wrench over in his hands, not because he needed to, just because it helped him think. "Listen," he said, "I don't know anything about corporate law, but I know when something's wrong, and I know when a person's telling the truth. You're telling the truth. So whatever you need from me, a phone, a ride, a place to think, a person who's not going to ask you to explain yourself every 5 minutes, I'm here." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" "Because you were sitting in the rain and nobody stopped," he said. That's enough reason. The neighborhood had opinions, of course. Leonard's block was the kind where people knew each other's cars and noticed when they changed. His neighbor Ruth Ann, who managed the building 2 doors down and had a gift for appearing at her window at critical moments, had spotted Catherine coming and going, and by Wednesday had apparently briefed most of the street. His friend Malcolm, who had the barber shop on the corner and had been giving Leonard unsolicited advice since 1987, stopped by the shop on Thursday morning. "Who's the woman?" he said, not even pretending he was there for anything else. "A friend," Leonard said. "Since when?" "Since Tuesday." Malcolm crossed his arms. "Nothing to talk about." "Brother, you have a teenage daughter in that house and you're letting a stranger." "I know what I'm doing," Leonard said quietly. Malcolm looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," he said, and he left. But Leonard saw him lingering on the sidewalk outside, and he knew that wasn't the end of it. Camille, for her part, had decided she liked Catherine, and that was that. She brought her tea without being asked. She offered to teach her a chord on the guitar. She asked her one afternoon, with the directness of a 13-year-old who doesn't yet understand that some questions shouldn't be asked, "Did someone hurt you?" Catherine had paused. "Yes. Are they going to get in trouble? I'm working on that." Camille nodded. "Good." And then she went back to her homework, satisfied. The trouble came on Friday. Elliot Crane had apparently decided that having Catherine floating around uncontrolled was a variable he didn't like. Leonard found out later that Crane had hired someone to locate her. What he knew on Friday was that a man in a gray sedan had been parked across from his shop for most of the morning, and when Leonard came out at noon to get lunch from the taqueria 2 blocks down, the man was still there, watching. Leonard walked over and knocked on the window. The man looked startled. He was maybe 35 in a polo shirt, with the soft, uncomfortable look of someone who did his work behind a desk and wasn't prepared for field variables. "Can I help you?" Leonard said. I'm parked here." "You've been parked here for 4 hours," Leonard said. "This is a commercial block. 2-hour limit, I've been watching." He hadn't been, but the man didn't know that. The man drove away within 10 minutes. But Leonard understood that this was not over. He called Catherine from the shop. "He knows where you are," he said. "I expected that," she said. She sounded calm. "Diane pulled the files last night. She's bringing them today. How long do you need?" 24 hours, maybe less. Then stay inside. I mean it." Catherine's former assistant, Diane, arrived that afternoon in a car that belonged to her sister. She was a small, precise woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a messenger bag over her shoulder, and she and Catherine sat at Leonard's kitchen table for 5 hours straight, going through documents while Leonard worked in the shop below and tried not to think about what would happen if this didn't work. What Diane had found was extensive. It was also, Catherine said when she came downstairs at 9 that night with both hands around a cup of tea, enough. Crane had forged board minutes. He had fabricated internal audit reports. He had used a shell entity, controlled through a law firm in Delaware, to redirect executive sign-off authority in a way that, while technically buried, was clearly fraudulent when you knew where to look. More importantly, he had made the mistake of sending certain internal communications through a project management platform that Diane administered and that still, quietly, logged everything. He didn't think anyone would think to look there, Catherine said. "Arrogant," Leonard said. "Yes," she said. That's been his consistent weakness. She retained an attorney the next morning. Within a week, the attorney had filed a motion challenging the board vote that had removed her, on the grounds that it had been conducted under fraudulently obtained procedural authority. Crane's legal team moved to block it. The thing moved into the courts, which meant it moved slowly, and that was when things got genuinely hard. Because in the meantime, someone sent an anonymous complaint to the city's business licensing office suggesting irregularities in the record-keeping at Payne Auto Repair. Leonard got the notice on a Tuesday. He sat in his office with the envelope for a long time before he opened it. When he read it, he understood immediately what it was. There were no irregularities. He knew that. His accountant knew that. But an investigation meant fees and interruptions and inspectors showing up, and it meant that the story on the street became Leonard Payne is in trouble, and in a neighborhood where word traveled fast, that mattered. He told Catherine that night. He said it plainly. No drama, just the facts. She closed her eyes. "Leonard, I'm so sorry. I never." "Don't," he said. "This isn't your fault. I brought this to your door. You were sitting in the rain," he said. "I opened the door. I made that choice, and I'm not taking it back." She looked at him like she was trying to understand something about him. Then she said, "I'm going to fix this." "I know," he said. "But even if you can't, I made my choice. That's on me." Malcolm, when he found out about the licensing complaint, came by again. This time he didn't have questions. He just said, "What do you need?" And Leonard realized, a little slowly, that the neighborhood's opinions had shifted. Ruth Ann was no longer watching from her window with suspicion. She'd started watching with something else. The taqueria owner 2 doors down had mentioned, casually, that he'd told the inspector who came in for lunch that Leonard Payne was one of the most honest businessmen on the block. Malcolm had apparently said something similar to anyone who would listen. The licensing matter was resolved within 6 weeks. There were no irregularities. The complaint was closed. The legal case took longer. 4 months through the winter and into the following spring. Leonard followed it in pieces, from what Catherine told him, and from what he could find in the business press, which started covering the story when it became clear that Crane's operations at Vesper Holdings had not been limited to pushing out the founder's daughter. He had apparently been positioning the company for a sale to an overseas entity in a way that would have been lucrative for him and catastrophic for the company's domestic workforce. The board, faced with that revelation, and with Diane's files now formally submitted into evidence, reversed course. Crane resigned. The Attorney General's office opened an inquiry. Catherine was reinstated, initially in an interim capacity, and then after a vote in March that was unanimous, in full. She called Leonard the night of the vote. He was in the shop, late, finishing a brake job. "It's done," she said. He put the wrench down. "All of it? All of it." He sat on the edge of his workbench. "How do you feel?" She was quiet for a moment. "Like I can breathe again," she said. "For the first time in about 4 years." He nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Good," he said. "That's good." What happened next was not something Leonard had expected, and he wants to be clear about that, because he hadn't helped her to get anything in return. He'd helped her because she'd been sitting in the rain and nobody stopped, and because when she talked, he believed her, and because he was the kind of man his father had raised him to be, even when that cost him something. But Catherine came back. She came with Diane and with her attorney and with a formal letter, and she sat across from Leonard at the same kitchen table where she'd sorted her documents on that first morning. And she told him that Vesper Holdings would be retaining Payne Auto Repair as the exclusive vehicle maintenance contractor for the company's Bay Area fleet. A contract worth, annually, more than Leonard's shop had made in the previous 3 years combined. He started to say something. She held up a hand. "Before you tell me you can't accept it, I'm not doing you a favor. I did my research. Your work record is excellent. Your certifications are current. Your pricing is fair. You are, by any objective measure, the right vendor for this contract. I'm correcting an omission, not offering charity." Leonard looked at the letter for a long moment. Then he looked at his hands. "My dad would have liked you," he said. "I would have liked him," she said. Camille, when she heard, performed what could only be described as a controlled celebration, dignified but unmistakably delighted, and then immediately began researching what she called appropriate expansion models for small automotive businesses, which she presented to Leonard that weekend in a document she'd typed and formatted herself, complete with a table of contents. She was 13. She was her father's daughter, the executive who eventually issued a public statement on behalf of Vesper Holdings, the new communications director, a careful woman who chose her words with obvious precision, described the incident as a period of significant internal challenge, and spoke at length about the company's commitment to governance reform. Several journalists noted that the statement did not mention Catherine's name. Catherine, when asked about this, said only that she preferred to be known for what the company did going forward. Leonard thought about that for a while. There was something in it that he recognized, a kind of dignity that doesn't need the last word. The morning after the contract was signed, Leonard opened the shop at 7 as usual. He unlocked the bay doors, turned on the work lights, poured his coffee. Everything the same. He stood at the entrance for a moment and looked down Clement Street, the early fog still low over the rooftops. The smell of the bakery, blocks up, moving through the air. He'd lost some business during the investigation months. Not catastrophically, but noticeably. He'd had 3 regulars quietly take their cars elsewhere, and while no one had said anything to his face, he'd understood the arithmetic. Uncertainty is expensive. People avoid it. They'd come back since. Most of them. He hadn't made a point of it. What he thought about, standing there that morning, wasn't the contract or the money or any of it, really. He thought about the girl in the back seat with her violin, sleeping through the rain. He thought about a question he used to ask himself when things got hard. What kind of man are you going to be when nobody's watching? He'd answered it on a Tuesday night at a gas station. He'd answered it again when the licensing notice came. He'd answered it every time someone in the neighborhood had looked at him sideways, and he'd looked back and not explained himself. He picked up his wrench and went to work. That's the thing about integrity that nobody talks about. It doesn't come with a guarantee. There's no contract that says if you do the right thing, things will work out. Leonard knew people who'd done the right thing and had it cost them everything, permanently, without any third act. He knew that. He'd thought about it, on the hard nights when the numbers were bad and the investigation was grinding on and Camille was asleep upstairs and the weight of the whole thing pressed down. He'd made his choice anyway, not because he knew it would be okay, because it was the right choice and he knew what kind of man he wanted to be. If you'd been at that gas station on that rainy Tuesday night, if you'd seen that woman sitting on the curb, precise and exhausted, holding a plastic bag with her whole remaining world inside it, what would you have done? Be honest with yourself, because that's where it starts, not with the outcome, not with what you'll get back. With who you are when it's raining and no one is watching and someone on a curb needs a person to stop. Leonard stopped. The rest of it followed.